Good afternoon. Obviously, we called everyone here to discuss so far what we have been dealing with here at CPD in 2021 involving the homicides in the city and the homicide rate. Obviously, it's extremely concerning considering we're so early into this year, and yet we are continuing to see a trend that is consistent with what we saw in our city in terms of violence in 2020. We have had extensive meetings already in regards to our concerns with the homicides, and we're going to continue to engage in ways to find new solutions to these problems. Now, I know many of us thought 2021 would be good to get rid of 2020 and kind of put that to bed. I've said often that 2020 was the year of the 3 Ps. We had the pandemic, we had protests, we had politics. Now, these 3 things are all intertwined, and they're also unique, and you probably figure, why would I be talking about politics and the pandemic as it relates to homicides, and as well as the protests? And a lot of that, we have discovered, have been weighing not only on the citizens of Columbus, but all over this country. And all of these life stressors have become so severe to the point where people are just at their wits' end. Just being honest, the amount of stress that us as humans are facing is extreme, and it's going to continue through this year until we figure out a way to get through this pandemic. Obviously, the vaccines are being distributed, and hopefully sooner than later, not only the entire country, but specifically here in Columbus, we can all get vaccinated if you so choose to do that. But again, we are here to talk about the homicide so far. In 2021, just as a point of reference, this time last year, we were only at 8 homicides. And in 2019, at this point, we were only at 4 homicides. So we are already accelerating at a pace that we don't want to happen. And we've also had very unique situations this year with homicides. Very young people, murder-suicide, obviously, which was extremely tragic. And we've also had robbery attempts. So my point is, we are kind of all over the place with the why in terms of some of these homicides, and it's very unique. And like I said from the beginning, we are trying new ways to come up with preventing some of these from happening. So I'm sure you have a lot of questions. So before I go any further, I guess we can start there.
So we've been here a couple of times since basically last June. You say you're trying a couple new ways. Can you be more specific about what those ways are, so we're not hearing the same thing over and over again?
Right. And nobody wants to hear a broken record, right? So, one of the things, like Chief Quinlan implemented a youth services program. It's a whole entire division, a whole separate section that had never been created before. And what this youth services section is a group of officers that are dedicated to working on resources to help young people in our city, not necessarily like troubled teens, but just young people in general. And this program was going to be implemented last year at recreation centers, swimming pools, basically anywhere young people are, so we can bridge that gap between law enforcement and the community, number one. And number two, to get most young people that traditionally are not comfortable with law enforcement and policing more comfortable with us. So not only would that prevent more crimes in young people, but if they know people who are also associated with that they would feel comfortable enough coming to us and telling us. So obviously the pandemic halted that. So our hope is that the pandemic will start minimizing itself through the vaccine, and we can start implementing a lot of these programs as it starts to warm up. So that's one example. Another example is, traditionally, we've, in the summertime, had the Safe Streets program, and it's been called many different things, where officers are on bikes, they're on foot, and they do all these different things. We're going to also continue a variable of that, but being even more intimate, trying to get into neighborhoods with without getting too far into the details, just officers that are more dedicated to serving a very specific area of their precinct, and them being responsible for that every day. And then they would also get a chance to know the citizens within where they work better and have more of a personal relationship, because clearly that is something that we need to continue to focus on, because we're not doing enough of that right now.
Can you talk a little bit about the cooperation aspect? A lot of these homicides and the non-fatal shootings we've had to start the year. We had one last night where the victim said he was in his bedroom, somebody walked in and shot him, he didn't know who, and he didn't want to prosecute. Can you talk about the challenges that poses for detectives in trying to prevent future crimes from happening and retaliation, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Bethany. The first thing, let's just talk about homicides in general, or any crime where we are trying to catch who the suspect is. The most important thing that people have to remember, there are one of three things that we need to solve cases. We need a confession, we need evidence, and we need witnesses. And a lot of times in some of these cases, we don't have the evidentiary value that we need to convict or to charge someone, and we don't have a confession because most suspects are not going to come forward with information that they've done something. So the most important thing are witnesses, right? We've talked about that ad nauseum. And, being honest, I am from the south side of Columbus, and I grew up as a young man in the early 90s in a neighborhood that was not safe, and it was riddled with a lot of crime. So I would be disingenuous if I stood up here and told everyone to just start telling on everything they see. Now, I want to be clear, I would love for everyone, if you have information involving a crime, to come forward and please help us, because that is someone's family member that you could be helping and helping your family in turn, because if we continue to allow suspects that we know are committing crimes out there on the street, you could potentially be next. So you're not only saving the people or helping the families of victims who have already been hurt, but you're also preventing someone else from being hurt by getting this person off the street. So that's very important. And if you don't necessarily want to come forward, we get it, but Crime Stoppers is another huge tool that we use where you can be completely anonymous. So some piece of information you may not think is important to a case, like you may have only got a partial tag on a drive-by driving away, and you would think, oh, I didn't get the whole tag, so it's not important. No, that's important. Even if you call that in anonymously and give us just that little bit of information, that could be the key in solving some of these crimes. But to get back to your specific question, yes, it is vital that we get cooperation from witnesses or anybody that's involved in it, because it makes the detectives' cases extremely challenging in solving them. I just spoke to a detective literally right before I came down here to make sure there was no other messaging he wanted out, and the thing that he told me that was troubling is they have a homicide right now where they have 5 witnesses that they absolutely know who committed that homicide, but without a confession or the evidence that we need, it's going to be nearly impossible for us to solve this case. Knowing that we have these witnesses and this detective can only do so much causes him to lose sleep at night. I've talked about that many times over. I know no one wants to hear this, but I always have to be transparent. The amount of mental health stress that goes into these detectives that are working these cases day after day and caseload after caseload, and have the ability to solve them, and sometimes they can't because, again, we don't have those key pieces of things that we need, really causes them emotional and physiological stress where it's almost discouraging to do their job. Now, they do their job and they'll continue to do it, but it's a really, really hard thing to walk into every day.
You mentioned already that teens and guns already this year is an issue. Last year was an issue as well. Lots of programs were introduced. Even last night we had 2 teen suspects robbed a gentleman. Gentleman opened fire, the victim, while he was being robbed on the 2 teens. One was killed, one's charged with the murder. What do you have to say about that? Are these programs working? Does more need to be done? What do you want to say to parents?
Well, first off, another great question. I'll start from the back end to parents. Being a parent myself, far be it for me to ever judge anyone how to raise their kids, so I'm not doing that. But one thing I am suggesting is please be accountable for your children. Make sure you know where they are at all times. Take a little extra time to know some of your kids' friends, because a lot of times we've seen in a lot of these crimes where some young people don't have any type of record or never gotten into trouble, but they start associating themselves with people who engage in this type of activity, and the parents have absolutely no idea with whom their kids are hanging out with. So my messaging to parents, first and foremost, is always know where your kids are at all times. 2, make sure you are aware of the type of crowd that they're hanging with. And 3, sit down and talk to them. Because again, I've said this over and over. 2020 has taught us the mental health of young people is at an all-time low. And all of us standing here are adults. So it's easy for us to cope because we have the life experience to go through something like this. But we're asking young people that have not been in school, like in some districts since last March, who have had zero structure, who have had no ability to go out and play and hang with their friends and do all these things and be left to their own devices is tragic. And because of that, that is another reason why I think the youth violence is so high, because guess what? Parents still have to work. Most parents have to work multiple jobs because they've lost their job because of the pandemic, so their resources are already stretched thin and they're trying to do the best they can, which I completely understand, but these kids are just left on their own, and it's just causing more and more potential for violence with young people.
And I'm sorry, I don't know if I didn't type this, but did you say how many homicides we've had so far in 2021?
So we are currently, Glenn, 12, not counting last night, so I believe that is correct. I'll double check and make sure it's 12. Okay, yeah.
And again, we were having some issues with the audio here. When it comes to the teens and the gun crimes, what's it going to take to get these weapons out of their hands?
So that's a fascinating discussion. That is a great question. One of the things that I know the community can help us with in terms of getting guns out of the hands of young people, if you know someone who is engaging in criminal activity, even if they're not engaging in criminal activity, say, for example, you see a young person on social media flashing a gun or some type of weapon, and it's a friend or a family member, like, actually do something about it. Like, go and take the steps necessary to get that gun away from young people. Okay, we see it far too often that young people have guns when they shouldn't. Clearly, they're not 21, so there's no reason for them to have it. So if you know someone who has one, figure out a way to get it away from them. If you have to call us, by all means, you let us know, and we'll be more than happy to conduct an investigation on anyone that has a gun that should not have it, regardless of what their age is, and we will gladly take care of that, because one gun could potentially harm many, many people. So that's one way. And from a policing standpoint, we'll continue to take tips. So we love that. You know, hit us up on social media if you don't want to leave your information. Like I said, call Crime Stoppers. Just call the PIO office and leave a message anonymously. Do whatever you can to get that information to us, and we will take that into consideration to get these guns off the street.
And any idea how these young people are getting these guns to begin with?
Well, there's lots of ways. I mean, in 2021 is no different than 2020. The fact that the accessibility to getting guns is so much easier now than it ever has been. There is unfortunately a dark market that these young people have the ability to get to them. And not only that, going back to committing crimes, right? So if you know someone's committing crimes, in my years of experience, I have personally dealt with young people when I was out on patrol that were responsible for multiple break-ins of homes where they took many guns and in turn distributed them out to other people. So one person can be capable of spreading so many guns and weapons and so many other things that they should not be out to the world. So we just got to make sure we're staying on top of the young people.
One last question. Any update on the SWAT situation that was on Risk Street? Those women, were they held against their will? Will there be charges?
Yeah, I tried to gather that information before we came out, and unfortunately I was not able to get any updates on that. But as soon as we get updates, I'll keep you posted. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.